let's talk about how to actually read a birth chart. I know birth charts can look super confusing and complicated, even for those of you guys who know astrology well. You know, there's lots of weird little symbols and markings, and there's lots of lines, and they're all crisscrossing, they're all different colors. It's like, how can you even tell what's going on? I know it can be super intimidating, but what I'm here to show you today is that it's actually not so complicated after all. Every birth chart looks a little bit different depending on which website you got it from, but what you need to understand is that each birth chart is really made up of the exact same components: the signs, the houses, the planets, and the aspects. As long as you understand these four basic components, you can basically read any and all birth charts. That's exactly what I'll be showing you guys today. Now for my example charts, I'll be using ones from astroseek.com and astrocharts.com. Now this video was actually inspired by my latest post on forecasting, where I've been teaching you guys how to read degrees on your chart. So if you missed that, you can catch my replay in my highlights bubble called 2021 Horoscopes. The first thing to understand is that a birth chart is actually made up of two circles. I know it looks like one big circle, but it's actually two circles combined: the outer darker circle of the zodiac wheel and the inner lighter circle of the houses. Here is a printout version of the exact same chart, just to make it a little easier for you guys to visualize how the two circles are different circles that are actually combined to make one chart. What you need to understand is that the houses circle represents the earth, while the zodiac circle represents the sky. Obviously, the zodiac circle has the various zodiac signs like Taurus, Aries, Pisces, etc. But the question is, how was this wheel actually created? Like, what is the scientific basis behind them? Let's get into a little astronomy here. Here is the sun, this little yellow ball here. Here is the earth. And here are all the other various stars that surround us in space. Now imagine, there is a white line going from the earth through the sun and into outer space. There's just an imaginary line here. Now you can see as the earth makes a rotation around the sun, around its orbit, this white line will be making a big rotation as well. It'll basically be going in a big circle like this. As it does that, the white line will be going through the various constellations. This is the zodiac wheel. This big red circle that you see here is exactly what you see on the chart here. That's what it's correlating to in the skies. Now you can see there are 12 zodiac signs to correspond to the 12 different constellations. There are 12 signs and they are each made up of 30 degrees. 30 degrees multiplied by 12 signs is 360 degrees. And this totally makes sense because we all learned in math class that a circle is made up of 360 degrees. So now we know there are 12 zodiac signs on every birth chart made up of 30 degrees each. On this chart here from astroseek.com, the zodiac circle is the outer ring here. You can see on the zodiac circle the markings of the degrees. That's what all these tiny little lines mean. For example, this is the sign of Gemini, and you can see it starts here at 0 degrees of Gemini. This is 5 degrees, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. If you were to count up all the tiny little lines here, they would basically all add up to 360 degrees. It's so important to understand degrees because it's such a crucial part of a birth chart. For example, you can see this person has their north node, this symbol, in Gemini. Their north node is in the sign of Gemini. But if we were to be more precise and count the markings, we would see that it is in 1 degree of Gemini. Now, this is really important to know because it's exactly the information we need for forecasting. For example, if there is a Mercury retrograde going on and we know that Mercury is going to be retrograding through 1 degree of Gemini, then you know that your north node will be activated during this retrograde. That's exactly how forecasting works. It's really all about the degrees. The final thing I want to say about the zodiac signs is that obviously you can see on this chart that they use the symbols for the zodiac signs rather than writing it out in text like this chart. A lot of birth charts will use the symbols just to conserve space, basically. So that is something that you just gotta memorize if you wanna learn a birth chart. Like, there's no shortcut around that. You just gotta memorize it. So I will share a resource if you wanna learn the astrology symbols. You can actually just go to astrologysymbols.com, and I'll put that in the captions here. Now let's move on to the houses. Again, the houses are always the inner circle on a birth chart. The houses represent our vantage point from Earth. It is really how we see the sky from our position here on Earth. There are 12 houses in total, and that is indicated by these numbers here. The first house, the second house, the third house, fourth house, etc. The houses start and stop at these lines here. Like the first house starts here and ends here. The second house starts here and ends here. The third house starts here, and so on and so forth. Now, what is important to understand is that the houses are always laid out like this, basically, where the first house starts here on the left hand of the chart, in the middle of the chart. And that is done on purpose because this line is really supposed to represent the eastern horizon. At the time of your birth, this is the sign that was rising in the east, and that's exactly where the first house starts. This line is also known as your rising sign because that's where the sun was rising at the time of your birth. On the flip side, the seventh house always starts on this line, which is representing the western horizon. This is the eastern horizon. This is the western horizon. So you can see really how the houses are really dependent on your position here on Earth. We can also see the southernmost point depicted by this line here, which is the start of the fourth house. And then the northernmost point is this line here, which is the start of the 10th house. The east, west, north, south lines on a birth chart are really considered to be super important. And sometimes they are depicted by a darker line, as you see on the astrology chart here. Because the house wheel represents Earth, it does represent the earthly activities and events that we experience in our lives. And sometimes I do like to think about them as actual houses. Like this is your marriage house with the 7th house. This is your career house with the 10th house. This is your family house with the 4th house. The houses represent our earthly lives, and the zodiac circle represents the sky and how the planets affect these areas of our life. So now with that, let's take a closer look at the planets. The planets are all the little symbols that are located inside the house circle. As you can see here on this chart, it's all these little symbols inside the house circle. On this chart, it's these symbols located again inside the house circle. This is a birth chart for December 1st, 2021. You can see this symbol here is the planet Uranus. Uranus happens to be in Taurus for this person. And that makes sense because we know that Uranus will be in Taurus from 2018 until 2026. So it falls right in line. We can also tell that Uranus here is falling within the 9th house. That's the house where it falls. If this person had been born an hour later, then Uranus would have fallen in their 8th house actually. From this, we can understand that a planet is in both a sign and a house. Based on where the symbol falls on your chart, you can tell which sign it's in and which house it's in. Planets are really the most important part of a birth chart because they bring experiences and events and energy. For example, Venus, of course, is the planet of love, and its house tells you the area of life that you love, what you find beautiful, or what you value. For example, Venus for this person is in their 5th house, which rules fun, games, creativity. That would say that this person loves to have fun or to play games, and they may really enjoy playing with children. If their Venus was in the 4th house, that might say that they really love their family. If Venus was in their 3rd house, ruling communication, that might mean that they love to talk. And what I really love about astrology is how it can capture the complexity of the human experience. For example, let's say you have Venus in your 11th house of friends, saying that you love your friends. But maybe at the same time, you also have Saturn in your 7th house of relationships, saying that you're very serious and maybe even cynical when it comes to your relationship. So the birth chart can help explain why you're really nice to your friends, but then kind of mean to your partners. Again, the planet symbols are something that you just gotta memorize. Like, there's no shortcuts. You just gotta memorize each of the symbols, and you will be able to find that on astrologysymbols.com. I also want to mention that some charts may have this like really tiny little R next to a symbol. I don't know if you guys can see, but there's like a little tiny R next to Uranus. The R always represents that the planet was in retrograde at the time of your birth. So that's also useful to know as well. Other charts might also have like little numbers next to each of the planets. And those numbers basically represent the degrees of the sign that the planets are in. Finally, let's talk about aspects. That's what all these crazy crisscrossing lines mean here. Probably the most intimidating part of reading a birth chart, not gonna lie. Aspects are always found in the middle of a chart, and they represent connections made between planets based on their angle of separation. Basically, aspects are sacred geometry. For example, we have Uranus up top here again. We also have Mars here at the very opposite point. These two planets are separated by an angle of 180 degrees. This is called an opposition aspect in astrology because the planets are opposite of each other, and that's exactly what this line represents. This is the opposition aspect. So this person was born with Uranus opposite Mars on their birth chart. You can think of each aspect as a conversation that is happening between two planets. There is some sort of connection between them, and thus they are exchanging information and ideas with each other. But of course, as in real life, we can have good conversations or bad conversations. The opposition aspect does tend to be more of a heated or like tense conversation. It sort of says that Uranus is affecting the way you act, Mars, in sort of a negative way. There's definitely more to it than that, but that is the high level overview. Here's an example of another aspect. You can see that there's also a line going from Uranus here down to Saturn here. I know it's kind of hard to tell, but this point here is supposed to correspond to Saturn's aspect. So Uranus is making this connection to Saturn. This is a 90-degree angle, so we call this a square because, of course, squares have 4 90-degree angles. So this person was also born with Uranus square Saturn. Now, the final thing I'll say about aspects today is that the colors of the lines, they definitely do matter because it basically represents whether the aspect is a positive one or a negative one. So, for example, like the more tense aspects, like the oppositions and squares, they're usually depicted by red lines on a chart. Like the square here is a solid red line and the opposition is a dotted red line. The more positive, harmonious aspects like sextiles and trines, they are usually depicted by a blue or green color on birth charts. Like for this one, they're using a dotted blue line for a sextile and then a solid blue line for a trine. So that's just what the colors represent. But it's actually important to know that different websites will use different colors for their lines. So it's just important to know what colors they're actually using. There is honestly so much more I can say about aspects. They can be quite complex. So let me know if you would like me to do another video on aspects. Okay, so we've run through the 4 basic components of a birth chart, and here are my final thoughts. I'm honestly making this tutorial today because I really want to emphasize the value of being able to read a birth chart. Like, you can gain so much information about someone just by glancing at their chart, because you can tell like which houses are important to them because they have a lot of planets there. You can see which houses are connected to each other through aspects. You can see which planets are influencing what. Like, you can basically get a sense of the overall flow or storyline of this person's life. For example, This is the birth chart of Marilyn Monroe, actually, and you can immediately tell how she has many of her planets at the very top of her chart. Astrologers would see this to indicate that this person would live a very public and visible life, which she obviously had. You can also tell that she has Saturn, a difficult planet, in her fourth house, ruling her home and family life, indicating that she has difficulty with childhood, which it seems like she did have. We can also tell right off the bat that the family influence is making a difficult red aspect to her identity zone and to her relationship zone. So we can tell something about her childhood influenced her sense of self and her relationships. It is super amazing, really, like how the birth chart can capture the entire story of a person. And all we gotta do is learn how to read it.